Hello.
Hi. One
Hi.
second.
Hi,
I think
Rishi.
I'm in a
I
different
think we just need to
orientation.
just,
Yeah, one.
yes. Hello.
Hi. How are you?
Hi. How are you? So, hello, everybody who's joined. Very quickly, I'm going to just take you through the idea of this live. This live of this conversation is a part of the Freedom Project initiative of the Goethe-Institut, an initiative which encourages artists, writers, thinkers, performers, filmmakers, photographers to come together and celebrate 75 years of independence, of course, but also discuss what freedom really means, what to explore the myriad ideas of freedom. And my name is Rishi Majumder. I'm a writer and I have been a journalist and an editor for many years. The person we are speaking to today, for the few who might on this live who might not know, because I hope you do know to on this live, is Osheen Siva. Osheen is a multidisciplinary artist, and she's from Tiruvannamalai. She's currently in Goa. But what fascinates me, just speaking from a personal point of view, what really fascinates me about Osheen's work is the vastness of the work, the versatility, the diversity that she explores. I mean, there's everything from there's surrealism, there's futurism, there's the science fiction, there is speculative fiction, uh, queer and feminine power, but also the in terms of medium, there are on her site on oceanseva.com, you'll find this series of portraits of politicians that she's done. She's just done a vast amount of work, and what I also love is the fact that it doesn't matter whether the work is for a creative enterprise or whether it's for a commercial, whether it's for Converse, whether it's for Absolute. The work always is always very original and very arresting. It's just something that it provokes you to think about a lot of things. And to carry on, we're going to talk about freedom and various ideas around freedom in art. And Oshi, the first question, I mean, what I wanted to ask you right at the beginning is, I remember you saying that you've grown up in China, Taiwan, and India, and you've spoken about being an outsider to any one tradition and culture. And I find that very interesting because when I see your work, there is a certain rootedness in culture. Often, for example, you find Tamil culture, you find Dalit culture, but there's also a transcending of any one identity, of being defined or confined by any one identity. So I wanted to ask you about freedom as a concept that it meant freedom from being caught in a box of identity. And just one quick example that I'd like to cite is, for example, the Kaliyaman that you did for the New Yorker. Very interesting. Obviously, it was a traditional Indian goddess that people are familiar with, but the way you recreated her was holding a cell phone in one hand, and there was a book in the other. And of course, there was a bottle and there was a baby. So I'll let you talk now.
Okay. Thank you so much, Rishi, for having me, but also for a very generous introduction of what I do and my practice. Um, so the kind of work that I'm interested in doing does already have a lot to do with freedom, just in just in terms of how it's based in surrealism and sci-fi, and what is fascinating for me in this field of like fantasy and futurism is the fact that you can imagine whatever world that you would like to embody, right? And you were right in saying that when I grew up in Taiwan, China, and in India, there was this sense of otherness. But I think how I use my art practice today is a way for me to research on my background, kind of understand what I want to do, where I come from, and what I would imagine the future to look like, which is why my work has a lot to do with um, imagining new worlds and creating the sense of utopia and seeing or exploring what I would like this hopeful future to look like, right? Um, and in that way, it has a lot to do with just freeing your mind of what exists now and creating your own sense of freedom. Sorry, what else did you ask? I kind of lost track.
No, I think you pretty much answered that question. I mean, what I asked was your work while being rooted in identity. So, for example, there's actually a portrait from your series on, I think it's the series that you have on Daily Lady, South Asian Identity. So that from that series, it's titled "Tamil Woman," hanging in our office, in fact. And
Oh, nice.
what struck us about it, it's in pink, and there are four eyes there. So what struck us about it, and what strikes me about a lot of your work, is how even when you tap into that, you tap into a Tamil identity. Yet there is, as you said, there's spring. So from there you go on to here you have the four eyes, you have the ears with the various earrings, and then you after tapping into that identity, you then take it somewhere else. So
Yeah.
I mean, yeah.
Exactly like what I said before, right? Like I'm still trying to figure out my style and the context. However, I think what makes my work is basically just everything that I'm interested in, right? Like things that I grew up watching, comic books that I read, and basically who I am as a person. If you divided that into characteristics, that kind of involves into my artwork. And of course, like my background and my Tamilian heritage and Dalit heritage, like you mentioned earlier, is a huge part of me, which is why I continue to kind of explore all these different aspects in like a mix of things that I want to create.
And I want to go on from there to talk about the freedom of imagination. And I think that's another very striking thing, the futurism in your work. There's this mix of surrealism and futurism. But what's interesting is what you said about imagining new worlds. And you have this one particular work about which you did for the Decolonize Fest. Right. And, there's this question. So it's very interesting that your work it's not just protest art, but it's actually presenting an alternative view of what things can be. And that alternative view is a very imaginative view. So I'd like to ask you, at what point of your process or your journey as an artist, you came to that place of looking to the future and looking at imagining a completely different future, and how you came to that point as an artist, as a creator?
That's a good question. Like I said, I don't think there was like one point per se, but it's still a process, right? I'm still trying to figure out like what I would want to say and what like speaks to me the most. In case of the Decolonization Fest, and since then, I've been kind of lucky enough to collaborate with people and brands and just creatives in general that kind of align with my principles and what I would like to, put my voice behind. And that's kind of where most of my work has been like evolving into, and that's what I kind of look for if I'm working with somebody. And also at the same time, I like to explore these things in my personal work as well. And it's kind of a circle that way, like what I want to create is what I put out into the world, and that is what people see and engage with me for, right? So that's how it's been working so far in my illustration work. But the context also kind of changes from the medium that I use. My illustration work a lot of times has to do in collaboration with a brand. Mural and fine art work kind of is my own thing. So I get like more freedom, artistic freedom in that way to kind of explore whatever I want to in my personal work, and which I have to kind of mold or have a conversation with in my like digital illustration work.
Your work, I mean, some of your work is very public in the sense that, of course, it's exhibited in galleries and spaces like that, but there are also murals that are out there for the public to see and interact with. And I have to ask you, especially in the context of our discussion, have you ever faced censorship or the challenge of censorship? And there are three elements to this question. One is, of course, censorship from the state. The
Mm-hmm.
other is censorship from people, from non-state actors who might decide to take offense. There might be vandalism. There might be, protests against you showing your work. And the third thing is censorship in terms of, when you're, like I said, so much of work that you do, even for corporates, is so, and I'm referring specifically to the campaign you did for Absolute on diversity, you know.
Mm-hmm.
So even that is so bold and so out there. So censorship from people such commissioners of your work. And sorry, there is a fourth kind, which is of course self-censorship. So I just want you to talk about the experience, this experience, if it was there, and how you dealt with it.
Okay, I'm going to try to answer all of them separately because there's a lot of questions. But just in terms of brand collaborations, like I said before, I've been quite lucky with collaborating with people that align with my thought processes. Absolute was one of them. They reached out to me to create something on women empowerment, which already kind of aligned with my art practice. So I was kind of happy to do that. In terms of public art, that's quite tricky, right? Because the audience is different. It's the general public, and you can't really control their thought processes. Like people that follow me, for instance, on Instagram, kind of know what kind of work I do, which is not the case in public art. Which is why when I do it by myself, I'm quite aware of where I'm creating the work and what kind of work I'm creating. When I work with organizations like Start India Foundation, they help me like curate the context and align it with what specific, like physical place that I'm making the artwork in. Although I do have to say, one of the good things about my public art and aesthetics is the fact that it's quite colorful, and I found that out that people in general are quite okay if things are like quite colorful, right? And I've kind of found that as a Trojan horse to like put forward my more powerful context through this colorful like facade, which has been quite helpful for me in terms of like public art. But yeah, it all kind of depends on who I like choose to collaborate with and who the clients are.
Your work deals with feminism, deals with freedom for women. A lot of your work deals with empowerment of women. Whether it is, as I said, portraits of female candidates or female politicians, which I think you did with, sorry, yep, this is with Letting Letter, Women in
Mm-hmm.
Politics,
Mm-hmm.
or whether it's other work that is far more surreal, blatant, out there, and something with a lot of messages. So when you look at this, when you look at feminism, the idea of feminism in your work, there are two questions here. One is how you see feminism in art and how it has evolved in the past to how it is how it, the avatars that it generates today. And the other is that in your own work, has there been, when you decided to talk about women, when you decide to talk about women's empowerment, and also the lens with which people try to look at women, the boxes in which people try to confine women, what was your journey and how you would put it out in your art? Was it something you thought about and then, the artwork came from there, or was it something that evolved as you went along creating these works?
Mm. Um, so the series that you had mentioned earlier, the Daily Ladies one, that was actually created like 3 years ago, when I had kind of quit my job and started as a graphic designer and started exploring what it would be like to be a freelance illustrator. And at that time, um, I had the need to figure out what exactly I stand for and like what I want to put out um, in my art practice, right? And I found that out that um, I grew up surrounded by very powerful like female relatives. Like my grandma was one of the first like women to be educated in our family, and she kind of went on to become like the headmaster in Tiruvannamalai. So they were very like inspirational um, characters around me, right? So that was kind of a natural thing for me to depict in my artwork. And then when I like started exploring more and more into what I would want to say, just representation of I also happen to belong to a lot of underrepresented communities. So I tried to kind of just explore that in my artwork. So yeah, and then after that, I kind of got lucky with collaborating with people that aligned with what I wanted to say. So yeah, it just kind of felt like a natural thing for me to explore.
And you've also, I mean, your work shatters a lot of constructs. For example, constructs of beauty, right?
Mm-hmm.
You have Tamil siren, or even Tamil women for that matter, you know. And how did you arrive at that point? I mean, if we had to talk about the freedom from certain societal constructs, we've spoken about gender and
Mm-hmm.
how it came from a personal place. From what you're saying, this place of realizing that things weren't as people just imagine that that women. I mean, of course, that women they see women in this subservient role, and
Mm-hmm.
from a personal place in your art sort of shatters those ideas. But when it comes to ideas of beauty, how did that how did that come about?
I think it kind of stems from the same region of not like, for instance, I was very much into sci-fi when I was growing up, right? And I wanted to kind of embody that in or explore that in my artwork. But I kind of figured out that there was nobody that I could relate to physically. There was not.
I'm sorry. I think you might have, Osheen, you might have muted yourself. I'm not able to hear you. Are you able to hear me?
Yeah, can you hear me now?
I can hear you now. Yeah, I can hear you now. I
Okay,
think the
sorry, there
last
was
few
a.
lines got muted.
Oh, I was just saying, so I was very into sci-fi growing up, and things that I watched, things that I read, like there was literally nobody that kind of looked like me or like were like my friends or people that I grew up around, right? So like representing things that are common for me and for people that I know was kind of important, and it came from there. Um, and just yeah, also as an artist, as a self-taught artist, I could only kind of practice from what I saw around me, right? So it came from like a need, but also hope for inclusion and like diversity.
When it comes to the future, if we have to talk about those works now, when it comes to futurism, uh, your future, I mean, you've spoken about your futuristic works having a surreal element to them.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, I wonder where it came from. And I'd like you to talk about this is the last question. And I'd like you to really talk about your journey with regard to futuristic art, because that is something you've touched upon before. But
Mm-hmm.
when you struck upon that idea and how it evolved, and if you can also talk about some specific works and what the processes for some of those works were, to just give us an idea about how your mind works in order to create these amazing pieces.
So like futurism as a theme for me is has always been very interesting. Um, and I think it kind of stemmed from the fact that fantasy and futurism, there's no limit for what you can create, right? You're essentially creating your own worlds, and they can exist beyond the physical realm of what we know now, right? I've also always been kind of interested in science and superheroes and like comic books and things like that. So it just kind of made sense for me to explore that area. Um, and Yeah, I think my work is basically just a mix of everything that I'm interested in. And I'm interested in a lot of like different things. My color palettes, for instance, kind of come from where I grew up around in Tamil Nadu. You see these like really contrasty colors around where I grew up, so that's where I pick up things from. I think I'm just trying to pick up things from what I like and what I grew up around, and like mix them in a way where I can imagine my own world. For instance, my last solo show that I did in Method, it's called Inflorescence, and it was based around these strong female, like Amazonian type characters that lived in their own world. And for me, it kind of was inspired by my family background, like people that I grew up around, like cousins and grandmas and like ancestors, and how I would like imagine them to be in this world, right? Which kind of included just togetherness and sharing love and intimacy and like having an open space. So yeah, these are kind of like the themes that are a common thread in most of the work that I do. And yeah, I also try to like explore typography and things like that, which I'm still learning, but have also roots from Tamil culture in general.
What I also find very interesting about your futuristic works is, I mean, of course, there are portraits and there are images of the future. There is your installation, which was the installation called Dreams from the Futures, and which was a different kind of work altogether, which I would like for you to talk a little bit about. And the other thing is that there's also this, I'm looking right now at something called Spaced Out, which is such an amazing work. I mean, when I came across it first, it was just so interesting to see a work which looked at, I mean, the figure that you see, and everything seems very, it just seems very chilled. It's a depiction of a lifestyle. So even, it's not just the depiction of a particularly great, when, for example, we look at history, what happens often is we get trapped into the space where we start looking at specific figures instead of looking at how people live. And a lot of your futuristic work actually depicts a space, depicts a kind of way to live. And I find that very so. I'm very interested in how that idea came about. And of course, I want you to talk about the installation, which is Dreams to the Future, and how that came about.
I'll just touch upon Spaced Out first. Spaced Out was actually created in the first couple of weeks of the pandemic. I was like all of us, we were stuck inside. And it's actually a self-portrait of me just like waiting for the pandemic to get over, and like the idea of the unknown, right? Which is also one of the reason, or one of the ways in which I create art, is just how I'm feeling and what I'm feeling at the moment being translated visually, right? And moving on to the installation was actually a collaboration with the Singaporean studio called Tina Fung, with the artist called Tina Fung. And the idea behind Dreams from the Futures was to identify elements from the Tamil architecture and patterns and culture, as well as Singaporean architecture, and to kind of combine that into a one world in the future, right? Utopia was the overarching theme. We also wanted to kind of speak about togetherness and solidarity and just hope, which is why you can see a lot of elements that kind of embodies these bigger themes, right? For instance, one of the smaller elements in the sculpture is a hand, like holding a mushroom. The idea behind that was to kind of give a nod to mycelium, how the mushrooms like below ground kind of connect all of us together. We also took a lot of inspiration from the colors in Singapore architecture and the colors in Tamil Nadu, and we found that there were a lot of connections, natural connections, just because we've had a lot of like Indian migration in Singapore. And so yeah, it was an amazing project, one of my favorites so far. Um, Also because aesthetically, Tina Fung and I like have a lot in common in terms of the colors that we choose and the vibrancy in which we like kind of want to present our work. So that was quite a fun project to be a part of.
Everyone that's listening in, if you want to see Osheen Siva's work, please go to osheensiva.com. A lot of the work is on the website. Of course, the best place to see it is live, in a live where possible, in a gallery or in person. But you can see it there. I'm not turning the phone around and showing it to you because it will really be a disappointment for me to show it like that on a live. But please do go check it out so that you have a reference to. If you haven't seen these works, then you have a reference to what she's talking about. And just, Osheen, I wanted to ask about your work for the Dalit Art Archive's new website.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And I found it very interesting. It was heavily borrowed from Dalit iconography and heritage. And I wanted to ask about how how those narratives come to be, how you go about constructing those narratives, from past and yet finding a modern expression, as you have here with Panther, other icons as well.
Yeah, I was very happy to have been approached to do this project and this commission. Um, like I said before, I try to explore these themes in my artwork and art practice as it is. So the idea behind this artwork was to just identify like easily recognizable elements and characteristics that belong to the Dalit community, right? For instance, the panther and the bari drum and Tayyam as a dance form, which have historically and still do kind of represent the Dalit community. Um, and yeah, I was one of the artists that has done artworks for Dalit Art Archive. Very lucky to have been part of that. And yeah, I look forward to maybe providing some sort of visual aspect to researchers and organizations and communities that have been doing this for a very long time. So I'm always happy to do any projects in this realm.
Right. Before we end, are there any questions from people? No questions yet? Okay. Well, I have a lot more questions. Unfortunately, the time that we have in Instagram Live is hardly enough to address work of this, like I said, work of this scope, and also the journey that must have led to all of these works. But thank you, Osheen. Thank you, Osheen Siva, so much for joining us and for talking to me.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, it was a pleasure, of course. It has been a pleasure to know your work, to view it, and it's been an absolute pleasure to talk to you. And for everyone who wants to know more about this project, do go and check out Goethe.de, that's goethe.de/India/freedom. All right. Thank you.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me. And I'm very happy to know that an artwork of mine exists somewhere around you.
Right. So that's at our office, Oijo, which is a creative agency. And it's a work really called out to us, not just to me, but to my co-founders and to the entire team. So it's just such a powerful
Lovely.
work.
I'm glad.
More power to you.
Thank you. Thank you. I had fun. See you.
Thank you. Bye.